What up, proverbial boy here, coming at you today with some of the worst advice that you've ever heard with regard to social interaction. Now, if you like getting terrible advice, make sure to obliterate the like button and roll around and get nasty with the subscription times in order to get the truth coming to you every single week. Now, I meet a ton of students who are just starting out and developing their skill set and charisma and their social skill set, and there are certain things that they inevitably struggle with during this nascent period of growth. And one of these universal problems involves reconciling their newfound attitudes with a lot of old cliches and so-called conventional wisdom surrounding social interaction that they once regarded as absolute truths. And what I mean by this is that over the years, we tend to accumulate a set of beliefs with regard to social interaction that sound good on paper, but when push comes to shove, a lot of these beliefs turn out to be empty platitudes that can actually end up working against you. So as you grow and you become more socially intelligent, you learn to recognize these old cliches for what they are. And you might even come to a point where you kind of start to actively work to eradicate the behaviors associated with them. In other words, you think to yourself, look, all that social conditioning stuff, that's nonsense, that's weak. It's social conditioning that society puts out to throw people off the track of the real Byzantine arcane knowledge that actually gets results. But the funny thing is this: behind all of these apparently ass-backward cliches that we've all heard since high school, there exists a nugget, a morsel, an element of truth. And these are the hidden nuggets of wisdom that only someone with a real-world understanding of the mechanics of social interaction can actually pick up on. So what am I talking about here? Let me give you a couple of examples. First off, there's that old admonition that you used to hear constantly from your teachers and your parents when you were a kid, and that's the following: you should think before you speak. You should think before you speak. My dad used to say this to me all the time when I was a kid. I was a little bit of a smart ass back in the day, surprise, surprise. And my dad would always say this to me. He'd be like, boy, you need to learn how to think before you speak. Now, of course, you might hear this and say, well, don't you guys oftentimes talk about not saying stupid stuff in your interactions, quote unquote? Like flagrantly saying things that are offensive and violate decorum just for the sake of being polarizing. Yes, that's absolutely true. You shouldn't do that. But the problem is this: a lot of people get way too wrapped up in this. For example, you might be out on a date and you're sitting there, you're talking to the other person, but in your head, you're always trying to say 2 steps ahead, right? To ensure that I don't say the wrong thing, I don't blow it. Okay, it's like you're Gary Kasparov or something trying to defeat the IBM Deep Blue supercomputer in the chess match of the century, right? You're contemplating every possible move, every permutation in advance, so you'll be ready. You'll be ready for it. You got to be ready, right? Wrong. Not necessarily. And it's kind of ironic because when you're constantly trying to stay 1 step ahead in the interaction, you actually end up sabotaging yourself. And what happens is this: by not focusing on being in the moment, you actually end up killing the vibe, which is far, far more important. Rhythm, expression, confidence, these things are all intertwined, okay? So if your mind is always 30 seconds in the future, well, you're gonna be subcommunicating some pretty bad things about yourself. Like, think about this. Why would somebody who is secure in their abilities be concerned about screwing up? They wouldn't. They'd be completely at ease. Be like, this is going to go well. It usually does for me, so of course it's going to go well. Why need to be concerned and micromanage myself? So think of it like this. This is the difference between the novice guitar player who's struggling to remember which notes to play next, and who's like watching the audience to see the reaction if it's good, and say Jimi Hendrix, who's just riffing and flowing straight from the soul. And if you've ever listened to a live Hendrix album, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, well, I would suggest that you check it out immediately. With the novice versus Hendrix, one sounds stilted and awkward, and the other sounds honest and soulful, and you just can't help but be drawn in. It's like that John Keats quote I'm always saying: beauty is truth, truth beauty. When you allow intuition to take over and you trust your faculties and you trust that what you have to say is valuable and has intrinsic value, and it's going to be good and cool and funny because you trust yourself, there's a sense of the completion of an incomplete gestalt, right? It's a sense of just everything clicking and it being right. By walking on eggshells, though, and like, again, hoping, really trying and thinking hard and monitoring, you're basically expressing that you're concerned about what others will think of what you say, right? You're creating a gap between your true self and the persona that others see, okay? So this gap exists within everybody, and for people who are highly charismatic, that gap will be so small as to be insignificant, right? There's almost, well, as close as you can get to a perfect lens between inner experience and outer expression, all right? They can never be completely perfect because our inner experience is far too nuanced and subtle and diverse to actually be expressed by our face, voice, body in 100% representation. But it's going to be that gap is going to be so small as to be insignificant. And there's almost no difference whatsoever between what they feel inside and what they're projecting out to the world. And this is universally attractive to all people because it doesn't have that air of micromanagement, it doesn't have that air of insecurity that you get when you're trying to keep 2 steps ahead. So back to the original point, you start to learn about charismatic communication and you learn that this advice that's being given out is, let's just say, not so good. Okay, and as a result, you kind of dismiss it outright as chode conditioning. But as I've come to realize, there is some hidden treasure that exists within this dung heap of conditioning. And as I've gotten more and more experience in social interaction, charismatic communication, I've developed a sort of field intuition, so to speak, like a heuristic field intuition about practically every scenario that one might encounter when you're going out and socializing. And this intuition is basically, when I go out, my brain is instantaneously comparing the situation at hand to all of the information that it's taken in and gleaned over the last 20 years of going out and going hard in the paint, so to speak. And when you get that many interactions under your belt, well, you have quite the preponderance of data to draw from, to put it lightly. So this readiness that lies within, this understanding that I can handle anything that comes up, this ability to respond dynamically to anything that any situation that might arise when I'm out in the field is something that gets instilled in your firmware, so to speak, over time. Now, intuition, it's not magic. Okay, it doesn't draw answers from nothing. And I think there's a lot of confusion about intuition, particularly in our day and age. And that's largely due to the resounding success of science and rationalism and empiricism. Rationalism works best when you have, and analysis works best when you have all of the information. But needless to say, in a situation of human interaction, stuff is a little bit more murky. You definitely don't have all of the information. So you need to hop back and forth between applied reasoning and intuitive guesses, hunches, and just relying on trust in your faculties to guide you to come up with impulses of things to say that are funny and cool and interesting and put a vibe on it that's going to compel people to talk to you. And then, of course, you're using rationalism to kind of move things along where you want it to go. So again, intuition isn't magic, but it can draw from information that's not consciously available to you at the moment. Your mind can only work with information that's been specifically dredged up out of memory and it's there in your cognitive working space. But again, intuition can work with information that is not consciously available to you. It's a subconscious process that can draw from many different experiences, memories, constellations of memories, and vomit forth suggestions or impulse of things to say or do, but you've got to learn to trust it. So it's not entirely conscious. Now, if you think back to when you first learned how to drive a car, at first all of the parts seemed totally discrete and separate, and it was kind of difficult to see how they all meshed together in a meaningful way. You're like, oh, okay, I have to push the clutch and then the stick, and then I got to let off the pedal, and then also I've got to worry about the turn signals and the mirrors and the other cars coming, and what are the rules of the road and all this stuff. But after years and years of driving experience, it becomes second nature how all the parts move together. And okay, there's still a conscious effort and there's a need to pay attention so you can respond to changing situations in a prompt and appropriate manner, but now you're actually responding to things as they occur, as opposed to attempting to juggle every little scenario in your head. And so essentially you're more present to the moment. And presence is absolutely required. It is an absolute prerequisite to have any sort of empathetic connection with people that you're trying to speak to or interact with, and have them view you in a favorable light. So when you're meeting somebody, being present shows them that you're actually paying attention to the other person's subjective emotional experience, which causes this good sort of me-you communication, as opposed to this awkward me-it communication, where you're not actually communicating with them as a person, but rather as some sort of agentic means to an end. And you're up in your head thinking about how to micromanage their perception of you, or how to manipulate the situation to where, wherever you want it to go. And it's again, very off-putting, and I dare say even creepy and somewhat offensive. So when you do have that actual me-you connection, that me-you communication, and actual presence, what it does is it shows that you're actually real, right? Okay, I can go up and I might do some crazy open or something, so you see some crazy outlandish shit. People oftentimes, they think of me as, oh, crazy Jeffy saying all these untoward things. And that is true, but at the same time, I'm also more present and more real in the ways that actually matter than many other people that they've met, and almost certainly more than most people that they're going to encounter at some bar. So, for example, I might be out and talking to a group of people, and they'll say something to me, and what happens is my brain is going to search the database. Again, my intuition subconsciously searching that database for similar experiences, and it outputs suggestions of things to respond with. And no, this happens instantaneously. Okay? Your brain is an extremely powerful heuristic computing machine. And every sliver of information that you've taken in over your entire life is somehow stored in it, somewhere. And again, if you ever heard of the theory of the holonomic brain or the holographic brain, basically, Carl Pribram from Stanford came up with this, or proposed this initially, that we cannot identify any sort of localized storage of memories in our brain. You can't take a cluster of brain cells and say, like, that's my sister's wedding, or that's my 5th birthday party. You can't do that. It seems to be somehow distributed throughout the entire structure, and he goes on to suggest that there may even be quantum effects at play. But one interesting thing to note is that a lot of the time, rather than throwing up suggestions of what to say, my brain will actually spit out warnings of things to not say or do. Okay, so for example, and again, this is where we talk about intuition and intellect being separate. They're not entirely separate. They're symbiotic. You want to think of them as different pipes that feed into the same faucet. And again, when dealing with problems, we'll often hop back and forth between applied reasoning and intuition. So, for example, my brain, somebody says something, my brain searches the database subconsciously, my intuition, and comes back in a nanosecond with something to say. But then my intellect, again, it's a bridge between the inner and outer. It's not a barrier, but even a bridge has guardrails. And my brain will give like a warning, like don't say that. Let it go. Just let that one go. Say this instead. Say the second choice. Right? If you do that, it's going to be game over. And we talked earlier about not saying stupid shit. And then this is what I mean. So let me give you a quick example. Let's say I'm interacting with a group and someone in the group says something that sets them up for me to deliver a joke at their expense. And it's going to be really good. And if I say this response, everyone's going to laugh their ass off. They're going to be falling on the floor, clutching their sides in agony, and laughing extremely hard. Like literally rolling on the floor laughing, ROFL. And I get ready to spit that line out. All of a sudden, my brain stops me. And it's my brain telling me that, yes, this joke might be the funniest thing I've said all month. It literally might be the funniest thing I will say all month. However, it's going to piss off the wrong person in the group. And I'll end up getting blown out of the interaction. So I just bite my tongue and I move on. And it's like, sure, I didn't get the laugh, but I got the connection and the benefits that come from that instead. And I can give you another example, one that came from program a long time ago. I was with a student, and I believe this was in Vancouver, and we were talking to a group of people, And it was going pretty good. I was connecting really well with one of them, and I was getting very close and intimate with this person. And then out of nowhere, the client comes up and he blurts out to someone in the group, and this person in the group was a little bit heavier. He says, "Oh, you know what? You look like Fat Jenny from the TV show." And it was like some Canadian television reference I didn't get, but apparently there was a character called Fat Jenny, and this person resembled Fat Jenny. And he's like, "Yeah, you look like Fat Jenny from the fucking TV show." And I'm like, "Dude, bro, what the hell?" Like, predictably, of course, what happens? They freak the fuck out. They're like flipping out, like, "How dare you suggest Fat Jenny, this, that, the next thing." And it's completely ruined, right? And they leave, and I go to the client later, and I after this, I'm like, "Why did you say that, dude? Why did you say that?" And he said, "You said to have no filter. You said talk with no filter, right?" And I'm like, "Okay, dude, within reason to a point, okay? There's something else about common sense." So, so that's one example. The funny thing, though, is like when I first got into all this, that warning wouldn't have come up for me either. Right? So I'm not trying to hate on the dude. And in fact, when I'm on program and I'm telling people, don't do this, don't do that, you got to understand it's coming from a place, us as the instructors, we've done all of these things ourselves, probably more than you ever will. So, it's coming from a place of firsthand experience. But again, that's something you have to cultivate. I probably would have, back in the day, I would have done maybe not the exact same thing, but I can be a bit of a caustic individual at times. So I would go up and blindly spit out these lines and then kind of be left there scratching my head in puzzlement after I would get blown out. So basically, what I'm saying here is that when you hear somebody say you should think before you speak, the true meaning of that isn't that you should be walking around on eggshells and carefully weighing every single word that comes out of your mouth, but think of it like this. It's more like installing certain behavioral filters in your head that are going to kind of guide you down a funnel of choices that lead you to the goals that you want, the outcomes that you want in a given interaction. And as you accumulate more and more experience socially, these filters become more comprehensive. Right? Like I said, you want your mind to be a bridge, not a barrier between inner and outer, between inner energies and outer expression. Right? It's a bridge. You're not judging everything in process, but the bridge does have guardrails. Now, another Hall of Fame cliche that we've all heard is the old classic, just be yourself, right? Your mom, before you went to prom, would say, "Don't worry, honey, just be yourself and everything will be fine. It'll all work out great." And at this point, you're likely thinking to yourself, well, that's absolute rubbish. That's nonsense. I've been myself my entire life, and it's not really getting me as much success as I would like. If anything, I need to become different than how I am now. And this is why I think a lot of people initially seek out structure when they want to learn how to socialize. Like they gravitate towards lines, etc. And it's precisely because they feel that it isn't enough for them to just be themselves. They feel that if they just had some more material, like, what do I say? What do I say? That's one of the biggest things I hear from novice people. I don't know what to say. I run out of things to say. If they just had some more material, everything would fall into place. And it just becomes a crutch, this sort of supplement that makes developing an actual personality unnecessary. And it's unfortunate because what they're doing is they're misunderstanding the true meaning of that phrase, just be yourself. When somebody tells you to be yourself, they don't mean to keep on engaging in the same old behaviors that haven't you gotten success in the past. And oh, well, just shrug my shoulders when it doesn't work out. What they really mean is to drop all of the filters of insecurity in your head, drop all the pretense, and actually start expressing yourself congruently. In other words, don't just be yourself. You want to be the best version of yourself. You want to be the hyper version of yourself. Be yourself to the hilt, okay? People who are operating on a very pure level internally, these people are magnetic, right? That's essentially at the crux of what we're talking about when we're talking about charisma. It's not about making yourself over into a new person. It's about letting go of that which stifles the attractive person that's already within you, right? You want to identify the various inhibitions that you have around expressing yourself congruently. You want to diagnose those, and we have a variety of mechanisms to do that. I do that a lot, like over the course of 8 weeks of my mentoring program, we break down where do you have inhibitions, or like what are the energy uses that you fear? And we don't just look at these things intellectually. In order to really become comfortable with these energy uses that you fear, you need to roll around with them. Direct experience is the only way to actually get comfortable expressing yourself congruently. We break down different areas: the voice, the face, the body, the intellect, the intuition, the emotional process. Break them down individually, identify the weaknesses, start to release those, expand the palette of what you can do with each of those modes or capabilities, reintegrate them into a more completely realized instrument that you can then go out and just let yourself, again, be yourself truly and express yourself congruently at the highest level, right? And when you do that, when you actually go through that process, and bear in mind, it is a process, right? These inhibitions, you've held them to be useful and necessary for your protection, to protect you from the judgment of the group for so long that they're largely below your threshold of awareness. Like, you probably don't even realize they're there. And you certainly don't realize the mechanism by which they're stifling you. You just know you're stifled, right? But once you start that process of introspection, you develop awareness, again, awareness without shame or guilt, because that's what caused most of these inhibitions in the first place. You start to, okay, recognize that I don't need these anymore. I can start that process of releasing them, and I can replace their manifestations in my life with decisions of my own choosing. I can make expressive choices that I want. I can do whatever I want with my face, my voice, my body in any combination. I can feel free to express myself congruently and not be worried about what people are going to think about that. And lo and behold, kind of paradoxically, you start to find that you have chemistry with a lot more people, way more than you did when you were hiding, when you were trying to hide and pander to what you thought other people might like or accept. All of a sudden, you have this magnetic sort of quality to you that draws people in. So for you personally, this feeling of flow through these previously inhibited modes and channels is absolutely exhilarating. And from the perspective of the people that you interact with, the benefit that they're getting from it is, again, this enhanced sense of human potential that's being conveyed. They're like, wow, this person's really free in a way that maybe I'm not, or maybe I am. And it's like kind of, game recognized game. I want to be around this person. It's absolutely magnetic. All right. So anyway, I'm going to wrap up here. But the point I was trying to make is that there's always several layers of meaning to anything that we perceive. And as you progress and mature in the development of this social skill set, many of the beliefs that served you in the past as a novice are going to cease to serve you. And I just think it's important to keep the student frame at all times as you go along this journey and constantly be seeking out those next level epiphanies that can only come from experience. That's what they call wisdom, and it's pretty cool. So until next time, get out there and make the myths.